Okay kids, welcome to another exciting grammar video, and this time it's the present subjunctive conjugations. In this video we will not focus on the usages of the subjunctive, but simply its conjugations. There are two types of subjunctive in Spanish, the present subjunctive and the past subjunctive, also known as the imperfect of the subjunctive. In this particular video we will focus on the conjugations of the subjunctive in the present tense. The most important part of the present subjunctive is to realize the theory behind how this particular verb tense is conjugated. The theory should be familiar to you because it's the same approach as we use to form negative to, usted, ustedes, and nosotros commands. The theory of the present subjunctive is that you take the verb that you wish to conjugate and put it into its yo form first of the present tense. You are then going to drop the O from the end of that conjugation and add the quote-unquote opposite endings. Go to the O, drop the O, add the opuesto. More on those opposite endings in the next slide. We'll first start with the regular of the present subjunctive. Again, the theory behind what we're doing is we're going to take the verb, put it in its yo form first, drop the O from the end of the verb, and then add the opuesto, or the opposite endings. So, for AR verbs, we're going to go to the O, drop the O, and add the following endings to the end of the verb. E, es, e, hemos, es, and n. And for ER and IR verbs, the opposite. So we're going to use AR endings. A, as, a, amos, is, and on. So basically, for AR endings, we're going to use ER verbs, and for ER and IR verbs, we're going to use the AR endings. We're just going to switch them. They're going to become opposites. So, for instance, if we were doing the verb pasar, we would go to the yo form first, drop the O from the end, and then place these endings on. So, pase, pases, pase, pasemos, pases, pasan. If we were doing the verb comer, we would go to the yo form first, then we would drop the O and add these endings to the end of the verb. Coma, comas, coma, comamos, comais, coman. It is extremely important that you follow the theory behind conjugating in the present subjunctive, which first states that you put the verb in its yo form first and then drop the O from the end of the verb. This is extremely important because of the amount of irregular yo verbs that we have in the present tense. So therefore, it is imperative that you put the verb in its yo form first and then drop the O before adding the opposite endings. Here you see a collection of verbs that have irregular yo forms, or they are types of verbs that have spelling changes in their yo forms. Take a minute, see if you can do any of the yo forms of these verbs, or what the yo forms are for the types of verbs that are listed on the right. After a minute, you can turn the video back on and see if you're correct. Again, these are verbs that you've known since Spanish 1 that have irregular yo forms. Poner to pongo, salir to salgo, hacer to hago, traer to traigo, caer to caigo, valer to valgo, oír to oigo, venir to vengo, tener to tengo, decir to digo, ver to veo, and then my personal favorite verb, caber, goes to capo. This one's a little bit odd, which is why I like it. And then on the right-hand side, you have types of verbs. So verbs that end in either CER or CIR, their yo form is going to go to ZCO. For instance, the verb conocer goes to conozco. And these are types of verbs, so there are many individual verbs that fall under the umbrella of these types of verbs. And these are what we call spell-changing verbs, and they're done to preserve the sound of the verb. Conocer would not sound correct if it were done as conoco, so we add that Z in there to keep it soft, conozco. The verbs that end in GER or GIR, their yo forms go to JO. For instance, escoger to escojo. That way there we don't have escogo. We keep the soft sound in it. Verbs that end in GUIR, their yo form is going to go to GO with the removal of the U. So, for instance, the verb extinguir is going to be extingo. And then verbs that end in UIR, their yo forms go to YO. So a verb like huir, to flee, their yo form is going to be uyo. The difference between GUIR and UIR is, if you notice the UIRs, the U actually stays in the verb here. And again, you're going to work from your yo form. So if we were doing a verb like huir, we would start with huyo, drop the O, and add the opposite endings. This is an IR verb, so we're going to use AR endings. So huya, huyas, huya, etc. Same thing with the irregular yos. If we were doing a verb like hacer, it's an ER verb. Go to the O, ago, drop the O, and add the opposite endings, so AR endings. Aga, agas, aga, agamos, agais, and then agan. The next part of the present subjunctive are verbs that end in car, gar, and zar. These verbs are going to change their form, as you've seen with both the preterite tense and with commands, to preserve the sound of the verb. So with car verbs, we're going to use K, case, K, kamos, case, and ken. For instance, sakar, the reason why we do this, if we had sakar, we went to the yo form, I get sako. If I went right to the opposite endings, this is an AR verb, I get sase. And that obviously doesn't work. I need to preserve the k sound from sakar, so I do that by using cues. Sake, 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 sakemos, etc. Gar verbs. Gay, gays, gay. No accent mark there, because if we had it, it would be the preterite. We don't want that. Gamos, gays, and gen. An example would be pagar. Go to the yo, pago, drop the o, and if I simply put on the opposite endings, I get something like pahe or page. Can't do that. The original verb is a g sound, pagar. So to do that, I use gue, page, pages, etc. And then the zar verbs, say, seis, say, samos, seis, and sen. So for instance, the verb to cross, cruzar, go to the yo, cruzo, drop the o, and then you can put these endings on cruce, cruces, cruce, etc. I will get into later situations where you have a cargazar verb that's also a stem changer. For instance, the verb almorzar or jugar. We'll get to those in a bit. As with any other verb tense in Spanish, we have a group of irregulars. It is the same irregulars that you saw for your -2, usted, ustedes, and nosotros commands, and they can be best be memorized by the acronym DISHES, D-I-S-H-E-S, and the D is for dar, I is for ir, S is for ser, H is for haber, E is for estar, and then the other S is for saber. These verbs make 100% sense that they are irregulars. The reason for that is we have to go back to our theory or premise of how we do the present subjunctive. Go to the O, drop the O, add the opuesto. When we go to the yo form of these particular verbs, they do not end in O, so I cannot remove the O from the end of the verb, therefore they must be irregular. The yo form of dar is doy, and then boy, and soy, and a, and estoy, and say. So that tells us these verbs have to be irregular. From this point forward, it's up to you to memorize what the conjugations are. And here are your conjugations of these verbs. We have dar, de, stay, demos, de, sten. Ir, as you can read, vaya, vayas, etc. Ser, sea, 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 also known as see, sees, Seamus, and Sean. We have haber, haya, hayas, haya, etc. Estar, esté, estés, esté, etc. And then saber, sepas, sepas, and so on. Be careful for your accent marks, especially with dar. We have them here. Most important because if you don't have it, it means the word of. Also be aware of it with the estar in all the forms except for estemos. And then, of course, you have them regularly over the vosotros, which you're going to have anyways. The last part of the present subjunctive is, of course, the stem changers, and there's a few important things to realize that does make the present subjunctive a little bit tricky when it comes to stem changers. First is for verbs that end in either AR or ER. These verbs are going to stem change in the boot, and you should know how to do stem changers and identify what kind of verbs make what kind of stem changes, so E to IE, O to UE, whatever the case may be. But you're not going to stem change those outside of the boot, so you're only going to do it in the yo, the to, the L, and the AOs form, just as you would for any other stem changer in the present tense. But you're not going to stem change either nosotros or vosotros. You're still going to use the opposite endings. There's going to be some examples in a few slides, so I will get to showing you specific verbs then. This part of the stem changers in the present subjunctive is perhaps the most difficult to remember to do, and that is for verbs that are stem changers that end in IR, and this has a very particular rule that goes with it. If the verb is a stem changer and it ends in IR, you're going to do a double stem changer. That's correct, a double stem change. You're going to make a one stem change in the boot, which is what you would normally do anyway, and you're going to make a second and sometimes different stem change outside of the boot. And I've left a little table for you here. If in the boot, the verb is an IR, remember this is for IR verbs only. If in the boot it's either E to I or E to IE, when you go out of the boot, it'll be E to I. And then if in the boot it's O to UE, like a verb like dormir, outside of the boot it's going to be O to U. And these are for IR verbs only. On the next slide, I'll give you an opportunity to practice some of these. This is an opportunity for you to practice some of your stem changes in the subjunctive. Again, make sure you remember that if the verb ends in either AR or ER, you're going to stem change only in the boot. And if the verb ends in IR, you're going to do a double stem changer, one inside the boot and one outside of the boot, according to the chart on the previous slide. Take a minute, give these a try, and then see what you come up with for answers. Okay, here are your answers to your stem changers. With sirar, we're going to go E to IE in the boot, but because it's an AR verb, when you come out of the boot, there's no more stem change, as you can see, cerremos and cerres. Same thing for soler, O to UE, suela, 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 and then suelan. When you come out of the boot, we have no more stem changer. That's because it is an ER verb, and sirar is an AR verb. Now, on the bottom, we have two IR verbs, so we have to pay extra careful attention to them. They're going to make two stem changers, one in the boot, one out of the boot. Pedir goes E to I, so in the boot, pida, pidas, pida, and then pidan. And outside of the boot, we're going to make a second stem change, and according to the chart, E to I still stays as E to I, so pidamos and pidais. Morir, O to UE, in the boot, muera, mueras, muera, and mueran, but outside of the boot, a second stem change from O to U, muramos and muras. Here's a couple more practice for you to try with stem changers. The verb jugar, which goes U to UE, and then sentir, which is an exception verb, meaning it ends in IR. And normally verbs that are stem changes that end in IR go from E to I, but this one goes E to IE. This is something that you have discussed and learned about before. So try these two, see what you come up with answers. Also be careful on jugar because it ends in gar, so you got to deal with that as well. Here are your answers, as you can see. Jugar, U to UE, but it also ends in gar, so we have to use the GUE. So juegue, juegues, juegue, and then jueguen. But outside of the boot, we're not going to make the stem change anymore, but we still use the gar changes. Car gazar verbs go through the entire verb, so juguemos and jugues. Lastly, with sentir, E to IE, sienta, 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 and then sientan inside the boot. But remember, it's an IR verb, so it's going to make a second stem change outside of the boot. E to IE, and then outside, this is in the boot, according to my chart. Then outside the boot, E to I, out of boot. So sintamos and sintais. In the interest of time on this particular presentation, these are some websites you can use for more practice on the present subjunctive, and I highly recommend you use them. You have spalion.com, conjuguemos.com, and the one that I really recommend very much is the one for Colby Spanish Grammar, which you can find here. They have awesome practice on the subjunctive, including 50 verbs that you can fully conjugate and check your answers. It's also going to be a great resource for you when we get into the usages of the subjunctive. It has some awesome practice on there, so definitely bookmark this page, save it, and do a lot of practice on it, and it'll definitely help you out a lot.